Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 2024 playthrough of your world champion Buffalo Wings. The Wings won their third World Series title in 8 years. A couple of days ago in game time, we've gone through our annual season review and our annual review of our farm system and some of our former players in the past two episodes. And now it is finally time for the off-season to begin in earnest. Thanks for all the suggestions over the last few days on which directions we should consider going. I do hope to get another episode out in the next 48 hours or so, but in the case that I don't, want to wish everybody an early Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, and thanks for your continued support of our channel. Appreciate everyone who watches and comments, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet and you are a watcher, would appreciate if you subscribe as well to help more people find us in this little niche of the internet. We've cut down our scouting, player development, and draft budgets a bit to put us in a situation where we technically have some money available. But we've still got to get more money available because right now we are set to lose both Luis Comaduran and Mike Brodin, who are two of the best and two of the only left-handed hitters on our team. We're clearly going to lose one of them, but in an effort to potentially keep Comaduran, I'm going to actively try to trade away Sincere Shazier. This is something we've been talking about for over a season at this point. Love the fact that he's an Iron Man. Love the fact that he's a homegrown guy who was a fourth-round pick who has become a very good pitcher for us with a 1.13 ERA plus and a 91 FIP minus over the course of his career. He's won double-digit games every year that he's been in the majors. He's had a winning record every year that he's been in the majors. He's been in the playoffs every year that he's been in the majors and had a really nice career for us, putting up a 27.3 WAR. He's also an Iron Man, so he consistently goes out there every fifth day, takes the mound, gives us 5, 6, 7 innings most times. So a very valuable player, but at this point he is our fourth starter. And paying $15 million to a 32-year-old fourth starter who's likely towards the downside of his career is just not something that I think our team can afford to do. And if we do move on from Shazier, that will open up just about enough money for us to potentially compete for Mr. Comaduran. We've thought about our arbitration-eligible players, and you can see we've made offers to all but 3 players, still deciding what to do at catcher. Mitch Houlihan is a very good offensive catcher, a very good defensive catcher, but he's fragile physically already and coming off of a fractured ankle, and he's set to make around $8 million next year. So still kind of figuring out whether we want Houlihan or Miller to be our starter next year, and whether we want to go with Houlihan and Miller or Houlihan with Berrios as his backup, or perhaps Miller with Berrios as his backup. So we've got 3 major league quality catchers. I think we're going to get rid of one of them over the next couple of weeks. May come down to who is the most interesting trade value for us, but not going to commit to Houlihan yet at this point. And then Tegan Tiley and Ben Elmquist are 2 veterans heading into the final years of their arbitration eligibility. And they're starting to make enough money for guys who are really utility guys that I think we can also free some money moving on from them. Tiley going to make about $2.5 million next year. He was our first-round pick a decade ago in 2031. He's been an average offensive player for us over the years, a little bit above replacement level when you consider the whole package. but he's almost 30 years old. He's wrecked physically, and we've never even given him 200 at-bats in a season. So my thought is we can probably get a more cost-effective version of him for the major league minimum than the 2.5-ish million that we would be paying him next year. So moving on from Tiley could free up some money. Don't think he has a ton of trade value, but we'll explore. Ben Elmquist is a similar situation. He was a first-round pick also in 2034. We've used him more frequently than Tiley. He's traditionally been our starting center fielder against left-handed pitching, ended up also as a fourth outfielder for us against right-handed pitching. So he's had about 250 at-bats a season over the last 4 years, put up a 117 WRC plus. So he's been a useful offensive player for us by just about any measure. He's also a competent defensive outfielder, good influence in the clubhouse. But he's set to make about $2.8 million next year. And although he's a pretty good contact hitter, we've talked about in previous episodes, we've got a bit of a log jam in terms of young fourth and fifth potential type outfielders in our organization right now. And I think it's another situation similar to Tiley, but even more obvious than Tiley, because we've got multiple guys making the major league minimum who I think we could slot in easily for Elmquist to save ourselves about $2 million a year. I don't think either Tiley or Elmquist is going to have a ton of trade value. Tend to think Elmquist might have a little bit more. If using either of them helps us get out of the Sincere Shazier contract, that can help as well. But the goal at this point is to see if we can come up with enough money over the next few days to make an offer to Luis Comadran, who's looking for $21.4 million a year over 5 years. Coming off of a really nice year for us, by far the best season of his career, put up a 138 WRC plus, 274 average with 26 homers and 84 ribbies. As I talked about, he's one of the few left-handers in our lineup, and he's got a real attractive batting profile against right-handed pitching. He's also durable in terms of his injury proneness. And when I take a look at the potential upcoming free agents, Spencer Nivens is a big-time hitter, but he's a decade older than Comadran, and he's going to be looking for about $10 or $12 million more than Comadran. So I don't think that's a realistic way to go. Tadayuki Sakaguchi, also about a decade older, not looking for quite as much money. But honestly, if things don't work out with Comadran, I think our former player Bobby Bolig might be the direction we go. He's looking for only $12 million supposedly, and still has a pretty favorable profile against right-handed pitching, which is how we primarily used him. And he's still a reasonably proficient base runner. But he's 5 years older than Comadran, and he's fragile physically as opposed to the durable Comadran. So even though we like Bolig and he's got the high work ethic, and he could potentially be making $7 or $8 million less than Comadran when all is said and done, I don't think Bolig is going to be our first option. I think what I want to do is try to get rid of Shazier, make an offer to Comadran, and see if we can lock him up. And if for whatever reason things don't work out with Comadran, we know that, well, we don't know. We know that Bobby Bolig may be a free agent. We know that Mike Broaden from our team will be a free agent. So there's a couple of options of solid left-handed hitting outfielders potentially out there if things fall apart on Comadran. But I think my goal is to try to lock him up before he even hits free agency, to ensure that we've got at least one big left-handed bat in our lineup next year. And I've talked about this over the past couple of episodes and mentioned it in the comments, but with the money that Shazier is making, his trade value is minimal. You can see if we shop him, there's a handful of options for them. Most of them are other veteran players with big and unwieldy contracts. The most interesting options, quite honestly, is Walt Hicks, who's a 29-year-old on a minor league contract in the Brewers organization, but we don't have to retain a penny of Shazier's contract to move on from him, and we're not making a big financial commitment in return. So I've spent a fair amount of time offline over the last few days exploring all of the different permutations and different options I can possibly do with Shazier. It's unfortunate that we're going to not really get much, if anything, in return for him. But I do think that given that we've got Barajas, Mendoza, and Lance as our top three starters clearly ahead of him, and then we've got younger guys like Barbarito and Palencia as potential 4 and 5 starters next year, not to mention Espinoza and Farrell. We've got plenty of starting pitching depth. So I'd love to get more back in return, since I still view Shazier as a good major league pitcher and a valuable resource. But with the amount of money that he's set to make, not just this year, but the next 2 years before the team options kick in for the third and fourth years left on his contract, it's clear that there's just not a lot of demand for him. So it may just be a situation where we let him go for little or nothing, with the thought that we're going to invest that money into ensuring that we bring Coma Duran back, and think that having Coma Duran on our team, particularly with the way the free agent market of left-handed hitters looks, is going to be a more impactful move to help us try to repeat next year than keeping Sungo Shazier on board. And I've spent some more time online exploring permutations, including some of the arbitration eligible guys that we might want to move on from, some other guys in our system who are out of options in deals for Shazier. And Shazier's contract really overwhelms whatever small amount of value some of those other players have. So we are going to just trade him for the minor leaguer Walt Hicks. We did convince the Brewers to throw in about $1 million extra for us, which helps a little bit on the margins. It stinks to be moving on from a loyal, longtime Buffalo Wing, especially coming off of a 17-8 season, tied for the most wins he's ever had for us. But as I said, we've invested so heavily in pitching over good parts of the past decade in our minor league system that we've got a lot of good young talent coming up that I think can do a lot of what Shazier has done for a fraction of what we would be paying him these next few years. Feel like we've gotten good value out of him. He's been with us, major league service of close to 9 years. So with the contract that we signed him to prior to the 2036 season, we got 6 years out of him, and we got his arbitration years and even a couple of his free agent years at relatively reasonable amounts. He was $14 million this year. I believe he was $12 million a year ago. So we got pretty good value out of him, but now he's heading to the part of the contract where he's going to be making 15 to 20 million potentially over the next few years. And I just don't see there being a lot of excess value that he's going to deliver for us. So we are going to go ahead and complete the trade with the Brewers. Fans not happy that Shazier is gone. I'm not really thrilled about it either. We've still got our 100 fan interest coming off of the World Series title. But that now gives us the money where we can potentially be a real player if we would like for Mr. Coma Duran. And my goal is to at least get the discussions going with him, since I do think he's the best left-handed hitting outfield option that's potentially available in free agency this year. And I'm probably being a little aggressive in the negotiations with Mr. Coma Duran. As we talked about, he's looking for 5 years at an average of $21.4 million, and he wanted a player opt out after year 2. We're offering him 5 years at an average of $17 million, but a team option for the 4th season, followed by a player option for the 5th season with the bigger numbers of $20 million. So it's really a 3-year, $47 million deal as far as the guaranteed money, which I think is pretty manageable for us. Doesn't expose us to a lot of risk. I tend to think he's going to want more money in a different structure than this. But as I said, there are fallback options like Bolig and Broaden who are going to potentially be on the market. I'm not saying this is a take it or leave it offer with Coma Duran. I'd certainly go higher than this, but I'm not going to bid against myself right at the start, given that there are options that I think can deliver 80 to 90% of what Coma Duran will at potentially 60 or 70% of the price he's going to end up going for. Yeah, and not surprisingly, Coma Duran looking for more money than we've offered him. He does want that player opt-out. We'll have to see if we can structure something that works for both sides. So he wants a 5-year deal at $21.3 million with an opt-out after 2 years. We're giving him some of what we want. We're giving him the opt-out after 2 years, but we're shortening the deal to 4 years, and we're putting a team option with a big number at the end of it. So it's likely a 2 or a 3-year contract, depending on whether he opts out. But the average annual value of $18.5 million is closer to what he's looking for, and the structure is closer to what he's looking for. He's definitely coming down in his money, looking for just over $21 million now. But he seems to want this 5-year structure. So we're going to have to structure it in a way that encourages him to opt out. It's going to be interesting to see if we can pull this off or not. All right, we're coming back at him with the 5-year structure he wants, the player opt-out after 2 years. We do have a team option rather than a player option in the final year, but we've included the bonuses that he wanted at even higher numbers than he wanted. We've guaranteed him a spot in the starting lineup, and our average annual value is up to $19 million, which is the most that we've offered him. So we're a little over $2 million a year away at this point. The structure, the closest that we've offered him to what he's been looking for with the 5 years, with the 2-year opt-out, but he still wants a player option in that 5th year, which I am somewhat reticent to do. And he's at least willing to think about this one. So we'll go ahead and submit the offer to Mr. Coma Duran. 5 years, $95 million, but realistically it's either a 2-year contract if he opts in, or a 2-year contract if he opts out of the player option, a 4-year contract if he opts into the player option, because I think it's extremely unlikely that we would exercise that more expensive 5th year. So we'll see what he has to say. He's coming off of obviously a World Series championship with us, and he was also named an All-Star for the first time this year. As we talked about, he and Broaden were our 2 best left-handed hitters this year, along with the catcher Houlihan, and it's conceivable that none of them could be back with us next year, which would definitely leave a hole in our lineup and make us look like the 2022-2023 Yankees offense that is very right-hand hitting heavy. And I don't necessarily want to duplicate that here in Buffalo. And while we're waiting to hear what happens with all of the players we've offered arbitration to, as well as what happens with our offer to Mr. Coma Duran to hopefully avoid him hitting free agency, we've got another trade that we're going to execute on too. Right now, we've got all 40 spots on our 40-man roster filled. Actually, that's not true because we're down to 39 after we traded away Shazier earlier today. But we do want to clear up some space for some younger prospects and some Rule 5 guys. So we are going to send Juan Aceves, a 24-year-old reliever who was an international free agent signing in 2034. He's only had 62 days of major league service a year ago with us, and he was fine. 3.57 ERA, more than a strikeout per inning. He is a good, solid, respectable right-handed major league reliever. He's durable, which we like. He throws in the mid to high 90s. But he's nothing special, and he's also out of options. So we don't mind including him. And we're also going to include Ben Elmquist, who, as we talked about, set to make about $2.7 million next year. Feel like we can replace him with one of our outfielders who's 3, 4, 5 years younger, most likely Nava, who we picked up in that Bobby Bolig trade with Colorado several years ago, a good contact hitter, decent defensive player, who's going to be making about $2 million less. So that'll free up a little money for us. And then we're also going to have to add in a 22-year-old minor league starter, Jorge Santana, a scouting discovery from 6 years ago. Not a big-time prospect. He did make it to A-ball this year, but he was 1-2 with a 5.97 ERA, so nothing special there. And what we'll get in return is not an overwhelming return. 24-year-old third baseman Mike Frank, who's in AAA with the Syracuse Mets, split this past year between AA Binghamton and AAA Syracuse, was a really effective offensive player at both levels, combined for 41 homers and 99 ribbies. But we look at his offensive profile, and he's maybe a slightly above average major league hitter. Does have a high work ethic, no speed. He's a competent defensive third baseman. He's a potentially excellent defensive first baseman with that 6'6" height and the ratings that he has there. But he importantly has 3 option years left. And if we bring Mike Frank on board, I think that makes it easier for us to move on from Teagan Tiley as a utility infielder. Right now we've got Rojas at first. We've got Seifu at third. And we have the youngsters Contreras, Andrus, and Whitehead at second base and short, with one of them in a utility role each day, depending on whether we're playing a left-handed or a right-handed pitcher. So Frank would give us another young infielder, more to back up Rojas at first and Seifu at third, for close to $2 million less than Teagan Tiley would be making. He's not as versatile defensively as Tiley. Could play him at second if we had to, although that turn double play rating for a second baseman is pretty brutal. He's actually also a guy who can catch in a pinch, but think he's got a bit better bat than Tiley at this point, even though he's not quite as versatile defensively. And he's also cheaper than Tiley. So we are going to go ahead and add in Mr. Jorge. No, we don't want to add in Nelson Davia to that trade. Looks like they said that they would do it for Jorge Santana, but now when we try to add in Jorge Santana, oh, there we go. It does work. I was confused for a moment. We'll try to get a little more out of them, see if maybe we can get a couple bucks back in return. It's clearing up some money. It's clearing some spots on the 40-man roster. And I said bringing Frank on board also lets us potentially move on from Tiley, just to show you what I was talking about with Mr. Tiley. I think his bat is a little worse than Frank's. His range is similar. His error rating is better. His turn double play rating is better. His arm is not quite as good, but he is a guy who can play second base, which is not as realistic for Frank's. But Tiley is also wrecked physically, which is probably not ideal for a utility guy that you want to be able to play in a pinch. And he's also going to be making more money than Frank would be. So I think this is the right thing to do to open up a little bit more cash for us to ultimately deploy on either low-priced free agents or in scouting and player development. And with the addition of Santana, the Mets will send us some money back in return. So we're giving up good players. Aceves is certainly a useful reliever, more than useful reliever, but our bullpen is so potentially deep with the fact that we intend to bring back Hainsworth and Farrell as right-handers out of the pen, along with our closer, Joe Scott, who, along with those other two players, is arbitration eligible this year. We're trying to go maybe a little higher end than Aceves, so it was going to be a struggle to get him onto the roster for the 26-man roster, and he did have some value in this trade, so rather than risk losing him for nothing if he doesn't make the 26-man and we have to waive him, feel that we're at least extracting a little value with Frank. Elmquist, as I said, we've got guys that are cheaper and I think just as good, despite the fact that he's been a good fourth outfielder for us. And then Santana, we don't mind losing. So we are going to go ahead and complete this trade, and that'll open up a bit more money for us as we start trying to figure out exactly what this team's going to look like in 2042. And with the departures of Elmquist and Aceves, who were both on the Major League 40-man roster, and the addition of the cash that we've got, and you can see now we've got a little bit of money available, even with the outstanding offer to Coma Duran, which will give us a little more flexibility as we get closer to the start of free agency. So now the thing we're going to figure out is what to do with our catching situation. And I'm definitely torn on Houlihan. I think after Achilles a year ago and then a fractured ankle this year that cost him the end of the regular season and the playoffs 2 straight years, at a guy who's going to be 29 right about the time he's healed from this injury, I think it's conceivable that he comes back wrecked in terms of his injury proneness. That said, the really good defense that he plays, in conjunction with the fact that he's a 314 career hitter with a 114 WRC plus, is a very attractive combination for a catcher. And he's also a left-handed hitter, which we've talked about is one of the potential issues for our team next year. So I think I'm going to make the offer to Houlihan. He's going to be a very expensive guy next year if he ends up playing 60 games and 200 at-bats for us, which is certainly possible. But I think he's the best catcher in our organization. And given that we're a win-now team, we're not making a long-term commitment to him. But I think it makes sense to bring him back. And then Walt Miller, who had been with us several seasons ago, we traded him to Colorado, and actually, I think we let him leave in Colorado. Was he in the trade? Was he in the Bolig trade, or did he leave as a free agent? He was in the Bolig trade. So yeah, we did trade him to Colorado for Nava, who we've been talking about, as well as Jim Arp, who did not work out for us. But we've traded back for Miller now. He's not a great hitter at this point in his career by any stretch of the imagination, but he can luck into a home run from now every once in a while. And he does draw a walk every once in a while, and he's also a competent defensive catcher. And we got the Rockies to retain most of his contract next year, so he'd only be on the books for about $5 million. But I think I'm inclined to bring him back as well and go with Houlihan and Miller as our two catchers. Barrios continues to intrigue me. He's an international free agent signing from almost a decade ago, a guy who's come up through our organization, a guy who has an excellent ability to draw walks, but he's the worst defensive catcher of the three, the worst personality of the three, and he's just not a guy that I want to have to play every day. If I can use him as a backup, that's fine. But I think I like Miller with the better defense a little bit more than him as a backup. The issue with Barrios, he's out of option years. So the question for me over the course of the rest of the offseason, if I do intend to go with Houlihan and Miller as our two catchers, is do we try to sneak Barrios down into AAA by waiving him, in which case I think there's a legitimate chance somebody else picks him up, or do we just trade him away for whatever we get in return? The issue is, if we trade him away, there's not exceptional value for him. There's a lot of offers out there for him, but most of them are solid relievers or respectable fourth or fifth outfielders, which are two areas that we don't have a lot of need for. So there's a part of me that, although I'd love to get something in return for him, the potential returns are kind of so mediocre that there's part of me that's thinking I just roll the dice and see if maybe we can sneak him into the minors, into AAA next year, which he won't be happy about. But a reliever who's going to be the final right-handed arm out of our pen, or a fourth or fifth outfielder when we've already got lots of good young fourth or fifth outfielder potential guys who are generally 3, 4, 5, 6 years younger than the types of guys that were being offered in trade, has me kind of thinking that the right decision is to just try to sneak him into the minors. But there's obviously almost 6 months till the next season starts, so my thoughts can change. Two of the most interesting guys that I've been looking at to trade him for, outfielder Edgar Pineda, right-handed hitting guy from Nashville. I don't hate his profile. He's a durable player. He's coming off a year where he put up a 113 WRC plus in the majors, and he's been a good, solid major league hitter. But he's set to make almost $6 million next year. As much as I like Pineda, he's a 113 WRC plus guy over the course of his career and a right-handed hitter. And I just traded away Ben Elmquist, who's a 117 WRC plus guy over the course of his career, who's also a right-handed hitter and who was set to make about $3.5 million less this upcoming season than Pineda was. So although I like the little pop that Pineda has in his bat, it's hard for me to argue that that's the right decision. And then Jared McFadden is similar. I like his profile as a left-handed reliever, and he's also a guy who could start in a pinch. But he's set to make about $4.5 million this upcoming year. And he's been, over the course of his career, almost a perfectly mathematically average pitcher. He's going to be 29 in a few weeks, and he's already fragile in terms of his injury proneness, and he doesn't throw incredibly hard. He's a good, solid pitcher, particularly as a reliever. But I don't know that I want to be spending $4.5 million a year on him. So I don't think I'm going to do anything with Barrios right now. This is something where we could certainly look as the off season moves on to maybe revisit the trade. And if any of you have thoughts on whether I'm being too stubborn or too stupid, always helpful to hear those in the comments. But right now, I don't think I'm going to do anything with Barrios. I am going to make an offer to Houlihan to try to bring him back. And then we're going to also shop Teagan Tiley. But the trade value for Teagan Tiley is not incredibly compelling. In checking in on Teagan Tiley, since we've been talking about him, and I've looked at this before, although I haven't shared it with you in the video, we can actually get some interesting-ish players in return for Teagan Tiley. The issue is that they're interesting-ish players who are making massive amounts of money. We could get our old buddy Joe Edwards, who's got 4 years left on his contract at 18.8 to 22 million a season. Ishmael Alvarado is a reliever coming off of a torn UCL, making over $10 million a year. Ricky Foss of the Dodgers, he's been offered to us for other players as well. A good, solid, left-handed reliever / potentially a starter. But he's making $13.2 million a year next year, which is close to the money we tried to get off the books with Sincere Shazier. So it's kind of, Ishmael Robles, pretty interesting defensive catcher with an acceptable bat, but he's going to be making $23.2 million a year for the next couple of years before he can potentially opt out. So there's good players in return, but they're good players with mediocre to bad contracts that we can get in return for Mr. Tiley. Given that he's going to be making about $2.5 million next year, I think the right decision might be just to not make an offer to him, let him hit free agency, and don't make a mistake in terms of trying to get something for him and taking back a contract that we'll regret and can't really afford. And as I've moved forward a day so I can shop players again, just for those of you who wondering, I did shop Tiley just for prospects, and you can see the Reds are the only team that would offer us any prospects, and the prospects that they're offering are all guys who are eligible to become minor league free agents. So not getting a ton in return. I may deal him just for one of these guys, and then we'll see if we can re-up him to a minor league contract rather than getting nothing at all for Mr. Tiley, but there's also a part of me that, given none of these guys are really impactful potential players, that I'm almost better off just letting Tiley go to free agency in case we decide that the offseason materializes in a way where we'd want to bring him back on board. And I think that's kind of the way I'm looking, given that the young guys are all set to be minor league free agents. Guadalupe Caicedo might be one of the more interesting players, and he's not a particularly interesting prospect. Luis Portillo is at least a left-handed hitting prospect. Not good defensively, has a little bit of speed. Looks like he could be a borderline useful pinch hitter against right-handed pitching. But honestly, I think with these guys who are headed to minor league free agency being all we can get in return, we can likely get any of these guys on the open market for free. I think I'd rather keep the optionality of maybe bringing Mr. Tiley back if he hits the free agent market and he's available for less. So we're actually not even going to trade Tiley away. We are just going to not make him an offer here in his arbitration eligible season and let him hit free agency. And just one final look at the other types of decisions that we're trying to make this offseason. Jesus Rivera, you may remember him, an international free agent signing from 2033. He was a guy that we had some pretty high hopes for. We ended up spending over $3 million on him. He was, for a time, one of the top 100 prospects in Major League Baseball. He was up with us in the majors all of last year and a very limited time this year. And over the course of his 260 at-bats in the majors, he's been a bit below average offensively, a bit above replacement level overall, thanks to some really solid defense and some decent positional versatility. But he's unfortunately a guy who is going to be out of options next year, 26 years old. So we tried to explore what we could possibly get for him in trade, and it's just not any particularly interesting prospects, certainly players who we don't think are going to be as good as Rivera. So this is another situation similar to what we've been talking about with Berrios, where I'm so underwhelmed by the potential returns that I think we just keep him on the 40-man roster. There's some chance, not a huge chance, that he'll make our team as a fourth or fifth outfielder, but I think even with Broaden likely leaving and Elmquist already traded away, I think it's still more likely we'll go in a different direction than Rivera as far as a fourth or fifth outfielder on our 26-man roster. But given that the potential trade returns just aren't that exciting, I think I'm willing to risk someone picking him up when we have to waive him to get him down into AAA next spring, and that at least gives us some probability that he remains a member of our organization. So with our thoughts on a lot of guys who are marginal 40-man roster type of player discussed recently, I guess the last question is whether we would make a qualifying offer to either Jimenez or Broaden. Elvin Jimenez is looking for a big raise to $9 million from the $1.4 million he made this year, but we're certainly not going to offer $18.9 million qualifying offer to a 36-year-old reliever. Mike Broaden is a little bit more questionable to me. He's looking for 4 years, but he's only looking for an average of $13.2 million a season. So I tend to think he would accept an $18.9 million qualifying offer. If for some weird way negotiations with Coma Duran completely fell apart, even then I wouldn't make a QO to Broaden. I think I would just try to sign him for $12 million a year, maybe over 3 years rather than the 4 that he's looking for. But I just can't see any well thought out rationale for giving a qualifying offer to Broaden, because I don't want him to accept it. I'd want the draft pick compensation. There's no way I want to spend $18.9 million a year on him, and I'm pretty confident he'd probably accept it. So I don't think there's really much of a decision as far as either Broaden or Jimenez are concerned. If negotiations with Coma Duran fall apart, we'll certainly submit a QO to him, but hopefully we'll get him locked up in the next week or two. And we've started to get a lot of our arbitration eligible players sign. Joe Scott, our closer, the fans are excited to have him back. Luis Palencia, we talked about this at the end of our last episode, 25-year-old who's fragile. We just signed him to a really long extension. He's got potential-ish to be a starting pitcher with that 40 stamina, but he is fragile, and he's a 25-year-old who's only had 5 games pitched in major leagues. Our scout think he's only a 2 potential guy. We signed him to a 10-year deal for $17.5 million. It gives him a lot of financial security, which, given that he's only spent 29 days on a major league roster and he's already 25 years old, and he is injury prone, probably means something to him. I don't think that this is an untradeable contract. I mean, the biggest annual figure is $2.5 million. So I think it's worth taking a flyer on him to see if he could be a useful arm out of the bullpen, and he's certainly in the mix to be our number 5 starter next year. More significantly, we did get center fielder Ishmael Velasco signed. Velasco was an international free agent signing of ours in 2034, $2.5 million that we paid to bring him on board. Made his major league debut September a year ago, spent the entire year up with the team this year, took over as our starting center fielder, and all he did was hit .315, 26 homers, 19 stolen bases, a 150 WRC plus. The fans love him. He's got really good range in the outfield, decent on the base paths, and I don't think he has the batting profile of a guy who's going to consistently put up a 150 WRC plus. But with that 65 outfield range, with the durability he has, with a bit above average speed, with a great personality, if he's a 120 WRC plus player, he's a pretty useful center fielder, and another homegrown guy, a switch hitter, which does help us a bit against right-handed pitching since he's stronger against righties, and that's an area where we don't have a ton of left-handed batters in the lineup right now. So it's a 9-year contract worth up to $102 million. He's getting financial certainty in the next few years. He's going to be making a lot more than he would be when he was making the major league minimum in even his first arbitration season or two. But we're hopefully buying out a couple years of free agency, maybe $5 to $7 million less than he would be on the open market. And then if he really becomes a big-time player, we've got a couple of team options towards the end of this. It amounts that could be a bargain if he continues to perform the way he did this year. So glad to have Velasco locked up as well. So with Velasco and Palencia, it's been a few years since we had an opportunity. We've had an opportunity to lock up our young players every year, but it's been a few years since we actually thought there was something interesting to do. 2 youngsters signed through their minimum salary years, their arbitration eligible years, and some of their free agent years, which should be a good thing. Josh Porter will be back with us next year. Hopefully he can play a more prominent role with Broaden and Elmquist likely to move on than he did. Eric Barbarito's back. David Espinosa's back. Alexis Mendoza is back as our number 2 starter. Juan Romero will be back as a guy who's led us in homers and ribbies 3 straight years since we traded for him. And last but not least, Damani Hainsworth back is an important arm out of our bullpen, and you can see we've also signed a ton of our minor league free agents as well. So starting to make some pretty significant progress here. Still waiting to hear about that offer that we made to Mitch Houlihan, who's still recovering from that injury, and then also waiting on the big offer that we made to Luis Comadran. And we've now gotten Mitch Houlihan signed. The hope is that he will recover from that fractured ankle as expected and be only fragile and not wrecked when we get an updated scouting report on him over the next month or so after the injury is hopefully healed. It's not a long-term commitment, so if he ends up with a long-term injury and missing the playoffs for a 3rd consecutive season in 2042, that's probably a good sign that we move on from him. But given his skill set, I think it makes sense to at least bring him back and try to see if we can nurse him through another season and have him available for the postseason in 2042. And Luis Comadran will be back with us for at least another couple of years. As we've talked about, felt like it was more important to have him on the team next year than Sincere Shazier. So we ended up signing him to that 5-year, $95 million contract. as I alluded to, it's either going to be a 2-year contract or a 4-year contract, most likely. I think right now we'd love it to be a 2-year, $34 million contract and then have him opt out to give us as much optionality as possible. He'll only do that if he thinks he can make more than $17 million on the open market, though. But with the fact that we at least got the team option for the 5th and potentially final year, and the fact that we also didn't need to include a no-trade clause, think that it makes sense for us. He's in his late 20s right now, still should be in the prime of his career, coming off of his best major league season, as we talked about, with that 138 WRC plus. And he will be in the mix to hold down either a corner outfield spot or the DH spot for us this year. I guess if something happened to Rojas, he could go back to being our first baseman, but Rojas is a little better defensively, so he took that over when we signed him as a free agent last year. So feel like the moving on from Shazier was a difficult decision emotionally, but I think it was the right decision for this team with the good young pitching we have on the way, and with the other moves that we've made, picking up a little bit of money in trades, getting rid of some contracts, and getting guys signed in arbitration for a little less than they were looking for. We've actually got a little bit of money available now as we approach free agency. We'll likely put most, if not all, of that into the scouting budget, but it's good to at least have the money to speak with some players during free agency, and who knows, maybe end up making a move in an addition of someone who can help us win next year. And as awards season gets underway, no Gold Glove winners for the Buffalo Wings this year, and for the first time in 4 years, we don't have the Mariano Rivera Award winner. But we do have a Silver Slugger, Daniel Rojas, the first baseman who we signed to that 4-year, $30 million deal this past offseason as a free agent, hoping that he would be the final piece to get us back to being a successful and championship-winning playoff team. Won the Silver Slugger at first base, 253 average, 36 homers, 91 ribbies, scored 102 runs, put up a 137 WRC plus, 3.6 WAR on the season. As we talked about a couple episodes ago, he did have no homers and only 5 ribbies in the playoffs, so he didn't really push us over the threshold to win the World Series championship, but we still did win the World Series championship even with him not being at his best during the playoffs. So it's all worked out, and nice to see Rojas win a Silver Slugger his first year with us. He is the only Buffalo Wing so honored this year. Tomorrow we'll find out Rookie of the Year, and we think between Mr. Jim Lance and our recently signed center fielder, Mr. Velasco, we are going to have 2 very strong candidates for National League Rookie of the Year. And our recently signed center fielder, who we're hoping is with us and productive for the next decade, ended up running away with the National League Rookie of the Year. Ishmael Velasco, a unanimous National League Rookie of the Year. Young center fielders, we talked about 315 average, 83 runs scored, 29 doubles, 26 homers, 73 ribbies, 904 OPS, 150 WRC plus, and a WAR of almost 5 on the year. He is now locked up through his early 30s with us, as we've bought out his arbitration years as well as a few of his free agent years. Hopefully he'll remain a very productive offensive player, but a pretty special season for Ishmael Velasco here in 2041 as a rookie. NL Rookie of the Year, NL All-Star, a world champion, and he was also the World Series Most Valuable Player. So not quite joining Fred Lynn and Ichiro as players with MVP awards and Rookie of the Years in the same season, but perhaps even a little more unique, a Rookie of the Year and a World Series MVP in the same season for Ishmael Velasco. As we expected, Jim Lance also got a fair amount of support. He finished third in the voting with 35 points total. 10-12 record is not impressive, but the 177 strikeouts over 161 innings is, the 2.68 ERA is, and the 5.1 WAR is very impressive. He was the starting pitcher in the deciding Game 6 of the World Series for us. So he, like Mr. Velasco, had some really good results in the playoffs. We'll take a look at their playoff statistics while we're talking about it. Lance finally got the win. He started 4 games and got his only win in Game 6 of the World Series in the clincher, but a 2.79 ERA and 31 strikeouts over 19 and a third innings. So he was excellent during the playoffs. And as we talked about, Mr. Velasco was also excellent during the playoffs, being named the World Series MVP. 281 average with 12 runs scored overall in 15 games, all starts, and a 125 WRC plus. Was even better in the World Series when he won that MVP award. And Mike Whitehead, our young infielder, finished 6th in the voting. So 3 Buffalo Wings getting votes for Rookie of the Year this year. Whitehead hit 295 for us in 440 at-bats. Played primarily second base, but did play some shortstop later in the year. He is a guy who has come up through our farm system, was our first-round pick, or a supplemental first-round pick, more accurately, back in 2035. And hopefully he will be a player who contributes many years to come. We talked about the fact that Whitehead, Andrus, and Mr. Contreras, all guys in their mid-20s, are going to be competing to play second and short for us next year. So feel like we've done a reasonably good job kind of turning over that middle infield. For a long time it was the likes of Steve Anderson and Tim Hull and Seifu at many times over the past years playing second base for us rather than third base. Although Anderson had a great year after we moved on from him when he hit free agency this past offseason. Like the fact that I think we've got a pretty decent middle infield and a relatively young middle infield right now, even if we do move on from Tegan Tiley in the coming weeks. And I mentioned after the season that our manager, Brian Hickman, who we promoted this year from Single A Marathon to become our manager, managed 1 year as a major league manager, led this team to its first world championship in 5 seasons, and then he promptly retired like a boss. And he was actually named the NL Manager of the Year today. So we've got a Gold Glove winner. We've got a Rookie of the Year. We've got Manager of the Year, which we've had a stranglehold on over much of the past decade. Don't think we're going to have a Cy Young Award or an MVP winner this year, but I think we will have some players get some votes for both of those awards. And as expected, we did not have a Cy Young Award winner or an MVP this year, but we'll take a look at the big 2 awards. Jake Blymeister of the Twins, the American League Cy Young Award winner. This was a guy who was the number 1 overall pick in the draft in 2034. Looking at that profile, you can see why the 29-year-old, 14-5 with a league best 301 strikeouts, 198 ERA, 55 FIP minus, and 7.2 WAR in the American League this year to unanimously win the Cy Young Award. In the National League, it was Jeff Dover of the New York Mets. Led the league with 34 games started, 224 innings, 287 strikeouts, a 0.91 whip, 79% quality starts, 62 FIP minus, and 7.8 WAR. So that was the best of any pitcher in baseball this year. 17-10 record with a 2.65 ERA. Not a unanimous Cy Young Award winner, but a very warranted honor for him. We did have some players get votes. Alexis Barajas, our ace, who won a Cy Young Award 5 years ago for his lone Cy Young Award, got a couple of first place votes. He tied for the National League lead with 18 wins, 18-4 with a 2.87 ERA and 206 strikeouts for the perennial All-Star. And Alexis Mendoza, a former fourth-round pick who's come up through our system, 11-8 with a 2.95 ERA this year, 211 strikeouts. And Mendoza also gets some votes for the National League Cy Young Award. Over in the American League, Alejandro Morales of the Yankees, 29-year-old right fielder, led the American League with 146 ribbies, also had 51 homers and a 306 batting average, led the league with a 630 slugging percentage, an OPS over 1, and a 173 WRC plus. All combined, it was a 6.7 WAR. Pretty impressive contact and home run power combo for the durable right fielder here. He's now an MVP in addition to a 2-time All-Star and a 3-time Silver Slugger at 26 years of age. In the National League, Kendall Pearsall of the Mets, 30-year-old, just won his third Most Valuable Player award. All he did this year was hit .321, 41 homers and 124 ribbies, while leading the National League with a 7.3 WAR as a good, solid defensive center fielder as well. Makes $54 million a year, so way out of the price range for our Buffalo Wings, but a great season and a great career thus far for Mr. Pearsall. Our Rookie of the Year, Ishmael Velasco, finished 6th in the MVP voting. Other than that, Alexis Barajas, our ace, got some votes. Alexis Mendoza, who also got Cy Young Award votes, as we talked about, also got some MVP votes as well. So not the worst award season with a Manager of the Year or Rookie of the Year and a Silver Slugger for our Buffalo Wings, but we do have the most important hardware, and that is, of course, the World Series trophy. So although it's nice to win those awards, what it's really about is winning that World Series trophy. And we went 11-4 in the playoffs and got the title this year. So I think we've done the heavy pre-arbitration lifting. Tiley, we've been seeing if there might be a little bit of trade interest in him, but nothing exciting. We'll let him hit free agency, and then I don't think there's a need for us to bring him back, but I will at least see what he's looking for on the open market. Broaden and Jimenez, as we talked about, we're not going to make QOs to them. So at this point, it's really just a matter of simming ahead through the arbitration hearings and the free agency filings, and then seeing who's available and whether there's any interesting international free agents that maybe we could take a flyer on to help our team. And we've simmed ahead to free agent filing day. Take a quick look at the international free agents who are available. See if there's anyone who piques our interest. Right now it looks like a relatively uninspiring crop. But as I say that, we look at Masaru Honda out of Japan. Looks like he could certainly be an interesting right-handed reliever. We don't know a ton about him right now, but he's only looking for $4.8 million. You know, that's admittedly fully valued for what he is, a good, solid-ish looking right-handed reliever out of a pen. So we probably won't go pursuing Boom Boom Honda all that aggressively. Catcher Juan Ramirez. And first baseman Shonan Tanaka. Tanaka, great home run power and a potentially world-class eye as a first baseman. Looking for $16 million. He's a 26-year-old veteran. think he could be a very useful bat. He's going to strike out an insane amount, given that we've got Rojas at first base and we don't have the type of money necessary. Don't see Relic Tanaka being a realistic option for us. Juan Ramirez, though, this catcher out of Cuba, is intriguing. Really like his defense and love his arm. Guy who could walk a lot, hit some homers, not going to strike out all that much. The issue is he going to make enough contact to hit over 200 in the majors? And he's also looking for almost $11 million a year. So the 23-year-old, even though I don't think he's quite ready to hit major league pitching, is looking to be paid like an experienced major league catcher, which he's not quite yet. So interesting prospect anytime there's a 23-year-old who could, in a world where he develops perfectly, be a franchise catcher is a interesting opportunity. Looking for $11 million. We do, with everything that went on and the players that hit free agency, have enough money with a little over $15 million that we could go after him. I don't think realistically, given that we feel like we've got 3 catchers already that we need to fit into 2 spots, and we're going to be paying big money for Houlihan, who's coming off of some injuries, and paying a good chunk of money for Miller to be a backup catcher. Don't know that Ramirez fits a huge need for us, but we're going to at least get a scouting report on him, hopefully get to know him a little better. I think with his defense, it's conceivable that someone may lock him up for 3 or 4 years, $10 million a year before we even have a chance to. Yeah, it looks like he's looking for 4 years, $10.7 million a year average. With that defense, he might not even be around by the time that we get the scouting report. I would hope if he lingers on the market and the price comes down and we think he's as interesting as he potentially looks, then maybe we would dig in and investigate him, but probably not our top priority right now given the catchers that we have on our roster. Taking a look at the biggest players to hit the free agent market here, and again, we could be a player, but we're not likely to be a big-time player in the free agent market. Spencer Niven's the biggest bat that's out there, supposedly looking for $33 million. Segaguchi is a guy who's been a free agent in recent years. We talked about Bolig and Broaden, another one of our former players, Tyreek Hardage and Tim Hull, also out there. Damian Bergman has been a good catcher for a long time, great defensively, although the bat at this point is not incredible. Dagobert Sadel, first baseman with a little bit of pop. Dave Shreve is a center fielder who's just not looking for a ton of money. He's honestly someone that I think I would think about. I honestly don't understand how his contract demand is only $1.8 million. He's got excellent outfield range with that 70 range. He can hit homers. His contact is nothing exceptional. Take a look at what he's done over the course of his major league career, and he's been an above-average offensive player with a 106 WRC+. I know I've spent most of this episode talking about the fact that we were okay moving on from Broaden in free agency and trading away Mr. Elmquist because we had so many good young outfielders who were potentially coming up to be our 5th outfielder next year. So it wouldn't necessarily make a ton of sense to go after Shreve. But for $1.8 million, it just seems like it's good value. He's not like a $20 million a year player, but I think he's more than a $1.8 million a year player. So I might just buy him as a value proposition and think we could probably flip him if we had to for trade. But we really only have one outfield spot available right now here, even on November 25th. Because Coma Duran, the recently signed Comaduran, arbitration eligible Romero and Porter, who will both be back, and our reigning Rookie of the Year, Ishmael Velasco. That gives us 4 outfield spots filled right now. And we've got guys like Jesus Rivera and Tylin Hotailing and even Luis Nava down in AAA who are in competition for that 5th outfielder spot at this point. Feel like all 3 of those guys are major league quality. At most, we're only going to be able to keep one of them. So it would seem odd to chase after Shreve, but by the same token, a durable center fielder with 70 range and 65 home run power is a pretty unique asset to be able to pick up for $1.8 million, even though we'd likely just be using him as a super utility outfielder. If we have injuries, he could play every day, but he's not going to supplant Velasco as our starting center fielder. So just looking for him to be a great defensive substitute in the outfield and some insurance, and a guy who has a good bat over the course of his career who could hit some home runs. I'm not even going to think about this one much further. I'm going to still try to get a bargain for him, and I'm going to still try to potentially lock him up to a really poor contract for him with some team options. I don't think he's going to go for this. He says he's looking for $1.8 million for 1 year. I have a feeling he's a guy who's going to conceivably end up going for more than that, but we're going to see if we can lock him up for 3 years at $1.5 million a year. Yeah, he doesn't want to make a long-term commitment. He's kind of more willing to meet us on the money. I like to give myself some options. We'll see if he'll be willing to do a 2-year deal with a team option for that second year that would guarantee a little more money to him. So it's a guaranteed $1.65 million for him for 1 year, and then a chance for a second year behind that. Oop, and we've made him angry. He's not interested in discussing this right now. So he really wanted the 1 year deal. As I said, I think he could be an asset, but I don't regret the fact that we've angered him. I kind of like the optionality of having him for multiple seasons if we were going to get him at that bargain level. And if we can't get him for multiple seasons, as I said, we've got 3 or 4 guys who are competing to be our 5th outfielder right now. They might not be quite as good as him, but they're also not as surly as him, who just kind of moved on after we were just trying to have a nice conversation with him. Taking a look before we finish up the episode at the potential free agent pitchers who are out there. And there are some really big-time free agent pitchers this season. Am I looking at this right? Or I'm looking at ratings relative to Major League Baseball, and there are some big-time pitchers out there. And Mark Billings, starting pitcher, looks incredible. I mean, he's looking for $34 million a year, won a Cy Young Award 4 years ago. Another big starter, Ron Whitmer, Darnell Polite, closer. We've talked about him in the past. Some guys looking for some big money, but then there's also some guys looking for a little bit of less money. I wonder if there's anyone interesting enough that we should try to do what we did with our old buddy Yohane Varejo on the market. David Rivera doesn't look like a bad prospect. Don't see anyone that we absolutely have to go making an offer for right at this second. But there's definitely some interesting pitchers on the free agent market this year. Again, it's not a huge need of ours, but we've got money to spend. So we've got some interesting things to think about. Do we try to bring in another solid reliever for our bullpen? We've got the money to do that if we wanted to. The top of the market is Duarte Aldana. He's fragile and 34 years old, but over the course of Aldana's major league career, he's put up a 149 ERA plus and a 67 FIP minus, and he's coming off of 2 straight seasons where he's been better than that in his early to mid 30s. So he could certainly be an asset for the bullpen. I like our bullpen right now. If I could add in a good quality middle reliever, I would do that. I don't really know that we need to spend $13 million on a player like him. We'll see what the scouting report looks like on the young catcher. We'll see if maybe if Dave Shreve doesn't end up signing with anybody, although now he's impossible for us to sign because he's so cranky at us. That would be a guy to potentially revisit. But again, I only kind of wanted Shreve on my own terms, and I don't understand why he's only looking for a 1-year contract at $1.8 million. Because it's not like it's a prove-it season for him. He combined for 31 homers and 88 ribbies between the Cubs and the Padres last year, with a WRC plus well above 100 and a 2.6 WAR. So it's not like he's injured. It's not like he was incredibly ineffective. Don't really get why he's only looking for 1 year and only looking for $1.8 million, but apparently our greed in trying to potentially get him for 3 or 2 years was off-putting to Mr. Shreve. But if we end up needing to use Nava or Rivera or Hoteling as our 5th outfielder this upcoming season, certainly not going to be the end of the world. So I don't think it's going to be an incredibly busy free agent period for us, but with the moves that we've made, we do have some money to spend. If we don't end up spending it, certainly would love to boost the scouting and player development budgets a little bit a couple months from now before the season gets going. We're going to have the Rule 5 draft coming up. We're going to have the winter meetings coming up. We're going to have international amateur free agency coming up in about 2 months in mid-January. So there's still a lot that's going to happen this offseason, but with Coma Duran locked up and Shazier gone, and the trade that we made to bring the young infielder Frank onto our team, feel like we've gotten the off-season period off to a decent start. And as I mentioned, we certainly have more money to spend right now than I think we would have anticipated. Check one final thing before finishing up the episode. Just wondering how much our old buddy Tegan Tiley is looking for as a free agent, given that we passed up the opportunity to bring him back at about $2.5 million. I wonder what he's looking for on the open market. Kind of the same area, 2.4 is what he's asking for. So the range he would have been in arbitration-wise, don't see him filling a huge need for us. And that wrecked injury proneness is not something I love. So we will find out what happens in free agency and as the offseason continues in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching and hope you have a great day.